Hello, everyone. So today we're going to be learning about how humans impact the environment. So what is our effect on the environment? What do we do that may hurt our ecosystems? So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you and we'll begin. So our standard is Biology 2.1 or SCOS, Standard Course of Study. 2.2.1, which says infer how human activities may impact the environment. Okay, so draw conclusions about how human activities influence and alter or change ecosystems. So the human population has grown exponentially, which means it's grown very quickly over the last 120 years. All these people need more of Earth's resources to stay alive. All right, so if we're looking at this graph, our x-axis shows the years. That is our independent variable. The year, regardless, is just the year. That factor changes at a constant rate. Our y-axis is our dependent variable. It depends on the year. So our y-axis is the amount of humans or the amount of humans in the population. That number is dependent on the year. So in the year 1300, there was less than 1 billion people on Earth. Whereas in the year 2000, there were close to 6.5 billion people. The amount of people on the Earth depends on the year. Humans have two types of resources: non-renewable resources, which are resources that cannot be replaced after use, hence non-renewable. These resources are things like coal, oil, petroleum, and natural gas made out of fossil fuels. Whereas renewable resources can be replaced after use, hence renewable. When you can renew something, you can make it new again, or you can replace it. Renewable resources are things like hydroelectric power, which is water power. Hydro meaning water, electric meaning power. Biomass, bio meaning life or living things, and mass meaning matter, like plants and animals. Wind and solar energy or sunlight. As humans, we use these resources, and how we use these resources affect the environment in different ways. Unfortunately, many of those impacts are negative. They're bad. Our next slides, we're going to describe several ways that humans negatively impact the environment. Make sure to take notes on your guided note sheet. So one way that humans impact the environment is that we cause our environment to lose biodiversity. Bio means life, and diversity means different, so different organisms. Biodiversity is the number of different types of organisms in a given ecosystem. And when a loss of biodiversity occurs, groups or species of organisms are removed from their ecosystems due to natural death or human actions. So here we have a lot of biodiversity at this picture at the top. A lot of different trees, and different organisms live in those trees, live in and around those trees. Whereas if humans tear down these forests or burn these forests or do anything to harm this ecosystem, you lose a lot of the homes for the organisms that were living there, or the organisms that benefited off of the plants and trees that were there. So here are some human causes of biodiversity loss. The first human cause, or the first action that humans take against our environment, is called deforestation. Deforestation is when we remove all of the trees in an area. D, meaning to remove, and forestation, which is trees. Deforestation means removing all of those trees. Why do we remove all of these trees? Well, humans remove trees to make room for agriculture or urbanization, building cities. Give me 1 second. I'm so sorry about that. So, humans remove trees to make room for agriculture, right? To grow plants or crops, or to build cities. So the Amazon rainforest used to be dense, full of trees, but an area of the rainforest was actually cut down for farming. Here we have New York City back in 1609, lush green grass, beautiful trees. But today, we know New York City as the home of the high rises. But that cut down a lot of the trees and a lot of the trees in the area. So by causing deforestation, removing all of the trees in an area, we actually destroy habitats and force organisms out of the area. So we force them to move out of their home when we tear down their homes. This also has a negative impact on the environment. If we have less trees, that means less CO2 is removed from the air. And we know trees use CO2 and sunlight and water to make oxygen through photosynthesis. So if we remove these trees, less CO2 is getting removed from the air. And if more CO2 is caught in the air, it contributes to the greenhouse effect and global climate change, which we'll talk about in the next couple of slides. Humans also take part in direct harvesting, which is when humans remove organisms from their environment forcibly. So why do humans do this? Humans overhunt or overfish. Humans remove organisms from a population for food, fur, feathers, and other body parts faster than they can renew their numbers. So remember I said humans were kind of like the bullies. Sometimes humans don't even hunt for food. They hunt just or just to have nice things. But these poor organisms, they're living things too, and they have feelings. And they can't recuperate or make more organisms faster than what we're taking from them. And so some of the effects are that these organisms are removed from their ecosystem and they decrease biodiversity, which causes ecosystems to become unstable. So if I remove a surplus of turtles, the organism that eats the turtles may not have enough food. Or if I remove tigers, there might be an overpopulation, or there might be too many prey that might overrun the population, and then they'll be fighting for resources. There's always a balance, and when we remove organisms from the ecosystem, we mess with the balance. Some species actually became endangered from overhunting and overfishing. And even worse, extinct. When an animal goes extinct, guess what? We can't bring it back. Sometimes humans introduce invasive species. Invasive species are non-native species introduced to an area. So species that don't normally live there, they're not native to the area. That's not their normal habitat. They're from somewhere else and they get introduced to this area. Humans accidentally or intentionally introduce new species to an ecosystem.
massive vines that blanket the southern United States, climbing as high as 100 feet as they uproot trees and swallow buildings. A ravenous snake that is capable of devouring an alligator. Rabbit populations that eat themselves into starvation. These aren't horror movie concepts, they're real stories. But how could such situations exist in nature? All three are examples of invasive species, organisms harmful not because of what they are, but where they happen to be. The kudzu vine, for example, had grown quietly in its native East Asia, eaten by various insects and dying off during the cold winters. But its fortunes changed when it was imported into the southeastern United States for porch decoration and cattle feed. Its planting was even subsidized by the government to fight soil erosion. With sunny fields, a mild climate, and no natural predators in its new home, the vine grew uncontrollably until it became known as the plant that ate the South. Meanwhile, in Florida's Everglades, Burmese pythons, thought to have been released by pet owners, are the cause of decreasing populations of organisms. They're successfully outcompeting top predators, such as the alligator and panther, causing a significant reduction in their food sources. They're not a problem in their native Asia because diseases, parasites, and predators help to control their population size. And in Australia, European rabbits eat so many plants that they wipe out the food supply for themselves and other herbivores. They're a pretty recent addition, intentionally introduced to the continent because one man enjoyed hunting them. Like the Burmese pythons, various factors in their native habitat keep their numbers in control. But in Australia, the lack of predators and a climate perfect for year-long reproduction allows their populations to skyrocket. So why does this keep happening? Most of the world's ecosystems are the result of millennia of coevolution by organisms, adapting to their environment and each other until a stable balance is reached. Healthy ecosystems maintain this balance via limiting factors, environmental conditions that restrict the size or range of a species. These include things like natural geography and climate, food availability, and the presence or absence of predators. For example, plant growth depends on levels of sunlight and soil nutrients. The amount of edible plants affects the population of herbivores, which in turn impacts the carnivores that feed on them. And a healthy predator population keeps the herbivores from becoming too numerous and devouring all the plants. But even minor changes in one factor can upset this balance, and the sudden introduction of non-native organisms can be a pretty major change. A species that has evolved in a separate habitat will be susceptible to different limiting factors, different predators, different energy sources, and different climates. If the new habitat's limiting factors fail to restrict the species' growth, it will continue to multiply, outcompeting native organisms for resources and disrupting the entire ecosystem. Species are sometimes introduced into new habitats through natural factors like storms, ocean currents, or climate shifts. The majority of invasive species, though, are introduced by humans. Often this happens unintentionally, as when the zebra mussel was accidentally brought to Lake Erie by cargo ships. But as people migrate around the world, we have also deliberately brought our plants and animals along, rarely considering the consequences. But now that we're learning more about the effects of invasive species on ecosystems, many governments closely monitor the transport of plants and animals and ban the imports of certain organisms. But could the species with the most drastic environmental impact be a group of primates who emerged from Africa to cover most of the world? Are we an invasive species?
So, as you can see, invasive species don't have any natural predators in their new habitat, so they take over and compete with other organisms. The invasive species can outcompete those native species and cause the native species to become extinct, which decreases biodiversity. Humans humans cause a lot of pollution by the factories that they create to manufacture cars and clothes and materials to build with. And so an impact of pollution by humans, one impact is called acid rain. So acid rain is air pollution that causes rain to become acidic. So the causes are when humans burn fossil fuels like oil and coal and natural gas and release the compounds of sulfur and nitrogen into the air. Those compounds combine with the water in the air and become acid rain. And so when it rains, those harmful chemicals come back down. Now, don't think of acid rain as it's acid, it burned my skin, but it's acidic for the plants and trees and producers that use the rain. And it's too acidic for them and causes them to die or not be able to make enough oxygen for us or remove CO2 from the air. That acid rain can damage those plants and hurts the herbivores that eats the plants. That acid rain can also change the pH of aquatic ecosystems. So it can change the pH of water that can kill off or reduce populations that live there, further reducing biodiversity. Here we have a statue that's been eroded by acid rain. Here are some trees that have been killed by acid rain and poor fish that have been killed as well because the rain is too acidic. That pH is too acidic for anything to survive. So while it may not burn our skin, it does affect organisms that help us to survive. Humans have also caused global climate change, which is an increase in average global temperatures. Humans release too much carbon dioxide into the air by burning fossil fuels, cutting down trees, and driving cars. This increases the greenhouse effect. So let's watch a video to learn about the greenhouse effect.
Let's take a look at the greenhouse effect. Here we can see planet Earth at the bottom of the screen. And way off in the distance, though not quite the millions and millions of miles away that it should be, the sun. Every day, vast amounts of heat and light travel across space from the sun to planet Earth. As you can see, the planet is protected by this thin blue line, which represents the planet's atmosphere. Now, some of the heat from the sun and some of the harmful ultraviolet rays are filtered out by the atmosphere. So as we can see in this close-up, the sun's rays hit the atmosphere and some of them pass through the atmosphere, and that helps to heat up the planet's surface. Some of the heat is reflected from the planet's surface back up towards the atmosphere and is able to pass out into space. So what happens when we have the greenhouse effect? As we build up more and more greenhouse gases through burning fossil fuels and through other forms of pollution that we put into the atmosphere, we build up a layer of gases in the atmosphere that create a kind of greenhouse for our planet. The sun's energy still passes through space to reach the atmosphere. Some of the harmful rays are taken out by the atmosphere, but then the heat still passes through and warms the planet's surface. Some of that heat is reflected back up towards the atmosphere, and some of it still passes out into space. But because of the greenhouse effect, with all those gases helping to trap the heat from the sun, some of that energy bounces back to the planet's surface. And that means that the planet gradually starts to get warmer. So that's the greenhouse effect. And to find out more, please visit our website, ypte.org.uk.
So, the greenhouse effect is caused when carbon dioxide is trapped in the Earth's atmosphere and bounces back and forth between the ozone and the Earth and causes the Earth to heat up, kind of like an oven. So the effect of trapping this CO2 and the Earth continuing to heat up, the average temperature rises, and that causes ecosystems to change. The ice caps melt, so that causes a lot of flooding and loss of habitat, and it causes droughts. So in other forms of the world, or in other parts of the world, rain doesn't happen as often as it should. And there are more extreme weather events in the Earth's attempt to balance out its conditions. This poor polar bear has no home. So, bioaccumulation is when there's an increase of amount of a pollutant like pesticide in the tissues of an organism. Pesticide is a chemical that farmers and agriculturists spray on their plants to kill pests. Side means to kill. Pest is like an organism that eats your plants or eats your crops. So pesticide kills those pests, but those harmful chemicals are passed on to the organisms that feed on the plants. The pesticide gets stuck in their tissues and it gets passed on when that organism is eaten. And so the effect is that as you move up the food chain, the amount of the chemical inside the organisms actually increases. So if I were to spray pesticides on some corn and a squirrel or a mouse ate the corn, then the mouse would have more pesticides in its tissues. And if an owl ate the mouse, the owl would have more pesticides in its tissues. This causes health and reproductive problems, particularly in the organism at the top of the food chain because it contains the most chemicals. Look at what pesticides can do and how they can harm us. Eggshells without the pesticide are nice and hard and strong, whereas eggshells with the pesticide are soft and malleable. So bioaccumulation leads to biomagnification. Multiple small organisms have only a bit, but the organism that eats those smaller organisms contain more of the pesticide in their tissues. And the other organism that eats the second organism has more pesticides in its tissue. So here we have a primary consumer. And here we have a secondary consumer. And here we have a tertiary consumer. Because it gets stuck in the fat tissues, the amount of pesticide as the secondary consumer eats the primary consumer, as the tertiary consumer eats the secondary consumer and gets the energy from it, it also eats the pesticides which accumulate in their tissues. Small organisms at the bottom have little chemical in their bodies, whereas large organisms have a lot of the chemical in their bodies. All right, so here are some summary questions to think about. Why are humans impacting the environment so much? What are some of the major ways that they are impacting the environment? And how do you think there is anything, or do you think there's anything that we can do to make it better? Think about that. All right, have a good day.